Bibliophiles of the internet, we are officially in 2022, but I still need to share my December wrap-up, which is what I'm here for today. I believe I read more in December than I've read in any other month of 2021, so I don't want to overwhelm myself here. I'm going to try to keep it informative, but also relatively short and sweet. Jumping right in, the first book I finished in December was My Arc of the Kindred by Alicia Dow. This recently came out on January 4th from Inkyard Press. It's a queer contemporary sci-fi story about a galactic empire that was nearly torn apart by war and disparity. So to solve that, they created the Kindred program, which mentally connects two people from different classes. The idea is that these two kindreds will share emotions, thoughts, and feelings, and therefore theoretically bridge the gap between classes and create more empathy. But while royals are not supposed to be linked with commoners, there's a girl named Joy who comes from a very impoverished planet who is assigned to be the kindred for Duke Felix. When the royal family is assassinated, Felix is next in line to ascend the throne, but that also makes him a prime suspect. So he realizes someone is trying to end his bloodline, which would mean putting his kindred in danger as well. So he escapes with Joy and they crash land on a mysterious planet known as Earth. Content warnings for some experienced fat phobia, classism, underage drinking, and references to alcoholism, some depictions of torture, injury, and death, grief, as well as references to anti-blackness, colorism, and gun violence. I also wanted to note that Felix is canonically pansexual or bisexual, and Joy is demisexual as well, so yes, this is a queer romance. No surprise here, I really enjoyed this. I adore Alicia's first book, The Sound of Stars, and this is definitely in the same vein of weirdly intergalactic road trip with tons of opportunity for joy and softness. I really enjoy how the kindred connection is explored throughout the story. It's fascinating to see how these two characters are connected, how they see what the other person sees and feels what the other person feels, as if it's their own experience. It creates a really powerful sense of intimacy and closeness. Because the story is about aliens trying to acclimate themselves to Earth, it also creates a really great opportunity to examine and comment on humanity from an outside lens, which allows us to reflect on the things that we so easily accept. The meeting of these two very different worlds reveals striking differences in beliefs and realities, and really speaks to how we can and should be imagining different possibilities and futures for ourselves. I also appreciate how Felix and Joy are showing humans that there is power in connection, especially with their kindred bond, and how expressing your emotions is not something to fear, but rather something we should embrace. There is power in letting yourself be seen and also being able to truly see someone else, and the story shows how it's worthwhile to explore and find those kinds of connections, even when doing so is not easy. And sort of similar to The Sound of Stars, I really appreciate how this story shows that making space for joy will always be important. Even if the world is falling down around you, even if you're being hunted by murderous aliens, that should not stop you from finding your joy, finding your power, and taking up space. I think a big part of the story is Joy especially realizing that she is enough exactly as she is, and that she contains immeasurable power, and that her love can make a difference. There is truly so much more I could say. This story is fun and action-packed, it has intrigue and soft romance, a great found family element as well, and I really enjoyed it. I do think the pacing is a bit uneven towards the end, but I still thoroughly recommend anything and everything Alicia Dow writes. This was fantastic. I gave it 4 stars. Then we had the Queer Lit Readathon. I read 6 books for that, including Boys Run the Riot, Right Where I Left You, and so many more. I made a separate wrap-up video for that, which I will have linked down below if you would like to check it out. Then my Patreon pick for December was Amor Actually, which is an anthology written by a bunch of Latinx romance authors. Quick plug, if you join my Patreon, you could get a chance to vote on one book that I definitely read and review every single month, so if you enjoy watching my videos, Patreon is a great way to support the channel and help me to continue making content. With that said, Amor Actually is an adult holiday romance anthology and a sort of remix on Love Actually, taking similar storylines and reimagining them through a Latina and sometimes also queer lens. There is representation for so many different Latina experiences and cultures, and gay, sapphic, and polyrep as well, so there's definitely something for everyone who enjoys any kind of holiday romance. General content warnings for some references to infidelity, experiences with death and grief, and some explicit sexual content. This might sound silly, but I didn't realize this was a Love Actually retelling when I first got into it, but it is, and if I may be so bold, it reimagines Love Actually the way it always should have been, which is to say less problematic, far more diverse, and with a lot more, shall we say, spice. It's hard to review anthologies because I can't go through every single story one by one, but a common thread that many of these stories share is that they're about characters realizing that they are worthy of love and happiness. The holiday season can bring up a lot of emotions, and it can be a time to reflect on what's important and take stock of your life, sometimes by choice, sometimes not, and I think all these stories are reflecting that experience. In the end, I think that's what all these stories are about. They're about celebrating characters who are trying their best to be true to themselves, to pursue what they want, to be honest and communicate their needs, and to go after the kind of love that they deserve, in whatever form it may take. Some of my favorite stories were Only Yours by Sabrina Sol, Meet Me Under the Mistletoe by Priscilla Oliveras, All I Want for Nochebuena by Alexis Daria, and Love in Spanglish by Zoe Castile, but overall this was a really delightful collection of stories. I got to read some Latina holiday romances from tried and true authors who I love, and I was also introduced to some new authors who I really want to look into in the future, so I really enjoyed this, and my rating averaged out to about 4 stars. Around the same time, I was also buddy reading Jade Fire Gold by June C.L. Tan. I believe this is a Chinese-inspired YA fantasy story, and it's about An, who's an impoverished girl with no past and dangerous hidden magical abilities, and she crosses paths with Alton, who's an exiled prince hell-bent on getting his throne back and exacting revenge. Alton is determined to expose the pretender on the throne, even if it means invoking dark magic, so he and An set out to unlock her mysterious powers and restore the Empire no matter the cost. Content warnings for depictions of death, poverty, illness, and imprisonment, some graphic violence and injury, some references to corporal punishment, and brief references to suicide. I don't have too much to say about this. For me, this was a very right down the middle, straight up and down fantasy adventure. It has a bunch of elements I enjoy, like prophecies, enchanted artifacts, mythological-based world building, and really compelling forms of magic. My favorite aspect of the story is the drama and the tension between characters. Exiled royalty trying to reclaim their throne is one of my favorite fantasy archetypes, and this story definitely fed the flames for me in that respect. I do have to commend the author on the dynamic character work in this story because I really did become invested in both main characters and all their complexity, and I found that even minor characters who only appeared for a scene or two made a really big impression. I also believe the author has gone on record saying that Zutara is a big ship inspiration for this story, so if you've watched Avatar and you shipped Zuko and Katara, I can definitely confirm that those vibes are very strong in this book. Another thing I appreciate is how the story addresses imperialism, especially in regards to this country's history, because it's something that its citizens have yet to confront. The false rulers on the throne are using their power and influence to rewrite history, and Alton wants to take back the throne so he can restore the truth and find a path towards healing or at least accountability in place of ignorance. I feel like that's a major theme throughout the story. When there's so much pain and loss, how do we go about healing, and how do we begin to understand and navigate forgiveness? For me, the pacing was a bit off, especially towards the end, because a lot happened in a very short amount of time, and I also didn't feel fully convinced when it came to the romance either, especially because there's a lot of weird time skips that bypass a lot of relationship developing moments. So it was kind of a mixed bag for me, but I think the world building is fantastic, and the story moves at a really impressive clip that kept me fully engaged, and there was definitely enough emotional dynamicism to make me want to read more of this author's work in the future, so I gave this a solid 3 stars. Then I read my arc of Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This is set to come out on April 5th from Knopf. It's a blend of sci-fi, historical fiction, and realistic fiction that follows multiple different characters across time who all experience a very unique phenomenon that defies explanation. Basically, there's a tree in the Canadian wilderness, and when people go there, they sort of black out and hear a mixture of different sounds that don't really go together or make any kind of logical sense. This has happened to a handful of people across time, spanning from the early 1900s to the mid-2200s when humanity has begun to populate space. There's a time-traveling investigator who's been assigned to interview everyone who's experienced this phenomenon and figure out what it means and whether it's dangerous. Content warnings for some references to colonialism, fainting spells, death, discussion of drug use, brief instance of gun violence, brief reference to infidelity, as well as some explorations of PTSD and contagious illness. Of the 3 Emily St. John Mandel books I've read, I would say that this might be the most ambitious. It draws on ideas of survival and humanity that we saw in Station 11, and it also incorporates some scenes and characters from The Glass Hotel that retroactively adds nuance to that story, but it's also completely self-contained, which is actually an incredible feat. The narration in this story is borderline whimsical at times and almost confessional, and that's what really drew me in. My copy is like 260 pages, and the first time I picked it up, I read almost 100 of those pages purely because of the voice. I think another big part of that draw for me was the mystery. This phenomenon the characters are experiencing is strange and bizarre, so you're trying to piece together how these disparate characters are connected and whether this occurrence has any kind of meaning or it's just coincidence. And to me, that's the crux of the story. It's about how humans go about trying to make sense of things that don't inherently have any kind of logic, and how we try to assign morality and some kind of meaning to things that are neither good nor bad, but things that simply exist. One part of the story, for example, is exploring pandemics, past, present, and future, and I think that connects with this strange phenomenon so well, because as humans, our brains want to figure out why this is happening, when in fact there may be no reason. Maybe what's so profound isn't why something is happening, but the fact that it is happening, that it's possible, and the irrefutable fact that it exists and it affects us, even if we don't understand it. Again, it kind of goes back to the idea of how we make peace with the surreal and the unexpected. When your reality shifts in a really drastic way, especially in terms of the human experience, how do we then go about defining what is real when the parameters we established before seem to no longer apply? I really think that's the question at the heart of the story, and even though the narrative is fairly sparse, it's still very provocative and emotional, and it hurtles headfirst towards an ending that's as strangely satisfying as it is ambiguous. Again, in terms of genre, in terms of form, I think it's very ambitious, but it twisted my brain in the most delightful way, and I have not stopped thinking about it ever since I finished it. I think Emily St. John Mandel came back very strong, and I gave this 4.5 stars. After that, I finally got a chance to pick up Tim Tamaro and the Subterranean Heartsick Blues by H.S. Valley. It's a queer satirical YA fantasy story set in a magic school in Australia. It has a Maori main character named Tim, whose girlfriend cheated on him and broke up with him just days before they were supposed to partner on a very big assignment. It's a project for their life skills class where they're supposed to act as parents to an enchanted egg child for class credit. It just so happens that Tim's arch nemesis, Elliot Parker, was fooling around with the person that Tim's girlfriend left him for, so Elliot suggests that he and Tim partner up last minute to really stick it to their exes. Content warnings for some references to bullying and depression, parental abandonment, experienced homophobia and biphobia, mentions of underage drinking, one HP reference, and some references to sex acts as well as fade to black sexual content. I want to shout from the rooftops about how much I love this book. It has everything I want in a fun, adventurous, whimsical fantasy story. It has really soft romance, humor, and wit. It has emotional depth and character growth, and it's just very delightful in every imaginable way. I do want to set realistic expectations and say that even though this story is set in a magical school, it's definitely fantasy light, where the magic and the magic system doesn't play a major role in the story. It's more of an accessory, but I don't think that makes the story any less. It's definitely more focused on self-discovery, giving yourself space to grow, learning how to be vulnerable, and oddly enough, through this quirky friends with benefits type situation, both of these characters are able to give each other a safe space. That was my favorite part of this story by far, this relationship between Tim and Elliot and how they get to explore themselves, explore their queerness and their expression, and how this fake parenting assignment unlocks some very deep emotions for both of them. For Tim especially, I think there's a really strong emotional connection to the assignment because his own father walked away from their family without explanation, so learning how to be a quote-unquote parent himself is bringing all of that to the forefront. There's a lot of emotion and vulnerability that goes into this assignment, and it creates this really sweet and funny instance of forced proximity between these two characters because entering into this partnership takes a surprising amount of time and trust. I also love how sex positive this story is without having to be gratuitous. There's an earnest vulnerability between these two characters, and they're very honest about where they are, what they want, what they need, and they also really stress the importance of consent. Beyond that, there's so many shenanigans these characters have to deal with and go through. They get themselves into so much trouble, but they also figure out that they can't make it through those things on their own, and I just really enjoyed their dynamic so much. Besides a few unfinished threads, I honestly don't think the story needs anything else. It reads more like a romance with a slightly magical backdrop, and I think it's so satisfying and fun and heartfelt. I laughed, I cried, I suppressed so many screams and inhuman noises I didn't know I could make. I don't know when H.S. Valley is going to write another book, but I will 100% be reading it. I gave this 4.5 stars. Then Melissa and I finally finished our series buddy read with Room to Dream by Kelly Yang. This is the third and I believe final installment in the Front Desk trilogy. In a nutshell, it's a middle grade series about first-generation Chinese immigrant Mia, whose parents manage a motel, which is also where they live. And the series explores what they have to deal with as immigrants in America as they go from managing the motel to hopefully owning the motel and all the ups and downs that come with that journey. Content warnings for bullying, some instances of racism, some anti-blackness, as well as experiences of colorism, classism, and sexism. I've definitely said this before, but the Front Desk trilogy is just an absolute masterclass in celebrating family, community, culture, and facing adversity with bravery and grace. Throughout the series, Mia, her family, and her found family have been confronted with so many challenges, and not only are those challenges named for what they are, which is systemic and unjust, but they're also only able to be overcome with a collective approach. From the very first book, Mia and her family realize the importance of community, the importance of lending each other strength and being the reason why other people succeed. They realize that people who are united can really make a difference. There's so much being explored in this story, like gentrification, capitalism, straddling two different cultures, American centrism, navigating rejection, and so many other things. But one idea that stood out to me the most was resisting the urge to hide things that are difficult. When we go through tough things in life, there's often this feeling of shame that comes with it, and it becomes hard to share those things with people because you don't want them to think that you failed or you don't want them to see you as less. As the story goes on, Mia is realizing that it's easy to only share the good things in life. It's much harder to be vulnerable, and that's exactly why we have to practice it, because you can only get support to make it through the hard things if people know that you need support. So that was a big conversation in the story, and I also really appreciate how this trilogy is giving young readers the language they need to understand and navigate things like mental health, racism, colorism, sexism, agency, and consent. This series also does such a great job of giving the characters room to be imperfect, to grow and heal, and to always do it together no matter what. It's such a heartfelt and thoughtful series that is an absolute gift in every single way. As I have done twice before, I also gave this installment 5 stars. Penultimately, I listened to Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki, read by Cindy Kay. This is pitched as The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet meets Good Omens. It's about a legendary musician known as Shizuka Satomi who made a deal with the devil to save her own soul from damnation if she gets 7 other violin players to trade their souls in exchange for success. With time running out on her contract, when Shizuka finds a young triracial trans runaway named Katrina, she feels that she's found her final candidate. But she also starts falling for a former Starship captain and intergalactic refugee who runs a donut shop, and the more time she spends with both of these women, the more she may want to instead find a way to destroy this curse. Content warnings for explorations of external and internal transphobia, misgendering, queerphobic slurs and ableist slurs, references to child abuse, manipulation, and gaslighting, homelessness, references to racism and anti-Asian violence, some instances of sexual assault, references to unsafe sex work, fetishization, and sex acts, some mentions of death and child death, and allusions to self-harm and suicide. Before I get into it, I do want to say that obviously I think content warnings are very important, that's why I share them, but I do want to emphasize that the transphobia especially, and even the brief references to abuse and assault in this story can weigh very heavily at times, so definitely be conscious of that going into it. This is a really tough book for me to review because I think it's full of so much pain and sadness, but there's also beauty and joy, and while I definitely wouldn't call it lighthearted, I do still think it's full of so much heart. When you step away from the story and try to describe it from the outside, it seems so bizarre, and it seems to have so many moving parts that don't feel like they could ever slot together, but when you give yourself over to the writing, it makes a perfect kind of sense. This is one of those literary universes that makes its own rules. It blends together contemporary society ideals and realities with the world of demons and aliens and donuts. The most compelling part of this story for me is how it explores connection, because when you think about it, you have 3 characters who live on the same planet but who occupy completely different worlds and spaces. Their unique experiences, which are worlds unto themselves, operate on very specific rules. It means very different things to be a demon or an alien or trans, and the characters are learning how to make an effort to understand the people around them and connect. At the end of the day, I think this story is about the universal desire to be heard and cared for and to be safe. It's about finding those things, like music, that transcend language, culture, socialization, or experience. That was another striking part of the story for me as someone who does have a background in music. The story does such a great job of illustrating music as a safe space and what a difference it can make to be encouraged and celebrated in what you create. And I think that also speaks to the way the story explores how if you're going to be hated or criticized or hunted or destroyed for what you do, you might as well do what you love in the way that you want. I'm still very much processing this story, so I apologize if my thoughts are all over the place, but this is one of those rare stories where I had no idea where it was going, and I was honestly stunned in the way it meticulously built up to its narrative climax. Again, it's definitely a heavy story and not an easy one to get through by any means, but by the end, I felt like I had no choice but to give it 5 stars. And the last book I read for the year was The Gilded Wolves by Roshni Chokshi. This is a historical fantasy adventure story set in France during the late 1800s. It's about this highly highly secret organization known as the Order of Babel, who are broken up into different houses, and those houses are meant to safeguard the location of Babel fragments. Basically, it's based off the belief that all diverse cultures and languages came from the Tower of Babel, and when it was destroyed, those fragments were scattered all over the earth and became different cultures that we know today. The Order is obsessed with protecting these fragments and other legendary artifacts of creation, and one of our main characters, Severin, is half French, half Algerian, and he was denied his ascension to become patriarch to one of these houses. Known for being a treasure hunter, Severin is tapped by someone in the Order to recover some ancient objects that have gone missing and that could put the safety of those Babel fragments in jeopardy, and if he puts together the right team and manages to play both sides, he could finally be given his inheritance. Content warnings for references to ableism, colonialism, and slavery, some allusions to child abuse and bullying, some mentions of self-harm and torture, and some graphic injury and violence. I do also want to note that this book has representation for characters who are BIPOC, Filipino, Indian, biracial, queer, and autistic. This book is outrageously good. It has no business going this hard and being this great, especially when we're talking about the first installment, but Roshni Chokshi really goes there, and I'm a little bit mad about it because I've been sitting on this book for almost 3 years. My brain hurts just trying to figure out how Roshni Chokshi pieced together this story because it has so many moving parts. It has puzzles within puzzles, it has mysteries within mysteries, and it invokes so much rich history, but then layers that with secret organizations and really compelling magic. You are dropped into this story in the middle of a heist, and you're left to find your footing as you go, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way because it perfectly sets the stage for what you can expect. There are like Mission Impossible, Indiana Jones level death-defying traps and stunts these characters have to navigate through on a moment's notice, and the level of action and intrigue is so much higher than I ever imagined. At times, it literally left my heart pounding in my chest. And I think the real magic trick here is that the author has done such a masterful job of crafting characters who are endearing, believable, and complex. They all have very specific skills, and the story does such a great job of establishing their expertise, so that when they're really put to the test in the heat of the moment, you believe it. The found family element is also one of my favorite things about the story. The dynamics between the characters are so rich, and there's such a great tension between them where they trust each other wholeheartedly, but then they also intimately know and become each other's weaknesses. They love and understand each other so much, but the bonds between them are definitely tested in really extreme ways, which makes the drama so delicious and really drives home what's at stake. This story genuinely surprised me at every single turn. The sheer amount of emotional content and action kind of blows my mind. There were like 10 times where I thought the story would end, but it just didn't. And that hurt me in a way that I will not be able to forget. Roshni Chokshi is just an incredible author. I will die on this hill. Her prose is so lush and emotional and sensual. Her world building is next level incredible and really engages the imagination in exciting ways. I haven't even gotten into half of what makes this a truly incredible first installment, but I gave this 4.5 stars. I am terrified of where the series might go, but I have to know what's gonna happen next. There it is. We made it. Those are all the books I read in December. As always, if you read any of these yourself, or if you plan to, feel free to drop a comment down below and let me know what you think. But that's everything I had to share with you for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.